Fate is what you can call this, or you can call it a coincidence. Insert whatever word you like, because today's guest has been brought to you by one of the wildest connections I've ever made with somebody who's been on this podcast, Daniel Lewis, who I'm super excited to chat with today, the founder of Pecco Tea, as well as a creative director at House of Lewis and a motivational speaker at Daniel Speaks. So, Daniel, let's
Love
let's
it.
let's jump right in. I'm super excited to chat with you, man. This is gonna be a great,
Yeah,
really great.
likewise, man. I like the intro though. It's like call it fate. It's all suspenseful. I love it. But glad to be here. Glad to chat with you, man.
You've had a bit of a, as many people in business, but specifically yourself, a bit of a wild turn and a lot of curves and twists that were very unexpected from where you first started as an entrepreneur to where you've ended up now. And I want to take it back a little bit. I know that you had been involved in the music game and did a lot of things in
Mhm.
that scene, but had to take a sharp turn into different avenues as a business owner. So I'm really curious to know, what was it that got you into music in the first place, and what was the goal of being involved in that scene when you first started?
Yeah, great way to kick it off. Music, music got introduced into my life when I started to realize the power of words at a very young age. When I was in school, and when I say power of words, I didn't know it was going to be music as a vehicle. But when I realized that words could impact people, affect people, could get a point across in such a dynamic way, I used to play around with words a lot, be it in creative story writing from as young as, your English class when you had to make up a story. And I was really into those things, writing stories. Then, as the hip hop rap scene started to grow and I started to grow up, I was getting 12, 13 years old with artists like Eminem who were just so amazing with words and wordplay. I just, I used to fantasize about it and I would practice freestyling. And it became very natural for me to just put words together, come up with concepts, punchlines, themes, metaphors. And so I started freestyling at school, back in the day when like tons of people crowd around, everything you say and things like that. So once I started to be known as this guy who can freestyle, I think that's when it kind of clicked to me that I think music is going to be the thing for me because I love crowds, I love words. Anybody drops a beat, they could point at something and I could just talk about it, make a story, and words would just come right in front of my mind. So it was really easy and fun. And so I kind of went on that journey with music. And then it just kind of grew naturally. Started at school, then it was school versus school, so we'd meet up with another school. Then it was city versus city, and I kind of just went down that rabbit hole until 14, 15 when I started to take music serious and start to pursue a career in music as a songwriter, Canadian songwriter, and things like that. And um, yeah, as far as the why music or how, that's kind of what started to get the engine rolling in the music scene.
And as you mentioned, like as being a Canadian songwriter and performing artist, when you compare to the US, where most popular musical artists come from, at least with English music, that is,
Mhm.
it's it almost seems like it's very few and far between. And any ones that are Canadian, you almost kind of forget unless they make that a big part of their identity. So, who are some of the Canadian music influences that had the biggest impact on you when you were growing up?
So it's such a tricky question because the music scene was so different back when I was trying to make it in music than it is now. Because I'd actually say that today it's advantageous to be from Toronto or to be from the Canadian music scene. Like we have so much talent today, or it's recognized in such a different way today, thanks to artists like Bieber and Drake and Alessa Carr and a lot of Juno Award winners and things like that. So it's changed. Back then, if I'm completely honest, I didn't really have a lot of Canadian artists that I could say it was this artist that was kind of paving the way. It was all American artists because the whole spotlight was on America. We had the talent here, but it just we just didn't, it wasn't our time. We just never had that stage. The technology wasn't what it is today. So when I was trying to make it in music, I was knocking on record label doors in New York and things like that in Atlanta, trying to get noticed, trying to run our songs in the clubs. Today, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, it's so, so different. But if I was to pull an artist, it would be Drake because when I was performing, Drake was performing. We were at some of the same shows and he was trying to make it and or carving his name out, and we were just on the come up. Same with Tory Lanez. But they stayed consistent at it and developed their craft and look what Drake has become, especially today. So I'd say Drake if I had to choose.
It's crazy to think of the influence that some artists have had on what they're doing, like just not only in music, but like in business as well. And
Mhm.
also when you consider, like you said, how far technology has really influenced the face of Canadian music. It's crazy to think about how many
Nuts.
artists, if they would have been doing what they're doing like 20 years ago,
Oh,
it wouldn't exist. Like their
oh
career
my
wouldn't
gosh.
exist, that is.
100%, because when you think about it, back in the day, it was all about, okay, first you got to, hone your craft. You have to actually be good. And then you have to somehow drum up demand and then find an AR from a record label to represent you, and then come up with a mixtape and then go shop it to record labels. That was the process. Today, I can make a song right now, like literally right now with a beat and a beat maker and live stream it and get fan base. And the demand could be so large that A&Rs and record labels come knocking at your door as an artist. Like you can bypass the whole thing. So the music scene would be completely different, I think, if it had the technology that we have today back when I was trying to make it in music. But, for its time, we did what we had to do.
It almost makes you appreciate the effort that you had to go through. Not that you want things
Yeah.
to be more difficult as time goes on, because yes, like that's the beauty of technology and the internet, and just yeah, like drum up a beat, drop it on TikTok, and if it blows up, boom, that next thing record labels could be knocking on your door, and it no longer requires sending cassettes and CDs and whatever across the continent just in hopes that somebody gets back to you by mail.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're right. And, kind of switching gears into a business mindset. I'm so happy that's how it was for us in music and just the hustle, the no's. Like it was just no, no, no. Because what that was doing was building up this strong, callous understanding of what it's going to take in the business world. So the moment when I switched over into business now with that same hustle mentality, learning how to recreate my image and my message, when I took all of that over into business, it was like boom, boom, boom. Like the business world wasn't even ready for it. But little did they know, like this all came from the stage. This all came from the music industry. We just switched gears, switched arenas, and we're doing the same thing. And we saw results really quickly, I think, because of that hustle.
So, speaking of business, you'd been in music for a handful of years, or at least had started to go on that path, and then had to change, and then decided to, I guess, based on reflection and life events, that you wanted to get more into business. What was the turning point for you that made you realize business was more the calling that you felt pulled towards versus continuing to make a career in music?
Mhm. So this is where it gets interesting and adventurous. I never chose business and I never thought, oh, I'm gonna get into business. What really happened was I spent more than 10 years in music, trying it on every front. So rap, hip hop, Canadian songwriter, pop, um, doing audio engineering. So, you know, I had a studio where I would kind of mix down artist music. I tried rock and roll, like I did it all. And in 2009, after I kind of took a seat, kind of stepped back from the main, music scene that I was involved in the clubs and things like that. And it's kind of like history, my past caught up on me, especially the hip hop scene. Bad crowd, wrong people, and one day just a casual walk to a convenience store. Um, these guys approached me, and long story short, there was this big altercation. these guys said, hey, aren't you that rapper guy? Didn't you say this in one of your songs about one of my friends? And all of that hoopla stuff. And that resulted in a fight, which resulted in me getting stabbed 4 or 5 times and nearly losing my life. And I'll spare you the gory details, but going through that whole thing, you wake up in the hospital. I'm like, what's going on? Doctor says, the stab wound on my neck here, if you sneezed hard enough, would have been fatal. So a lot of reflection, you can imagine, was going on at this point in my life. I'm 21 years old at that point, nearly lose my life on account of music. And it was in the hospital when I started to see people's life choices impact my life. So the person who decided to go to school to be a pilot, paramedic pilot, their decision helped save my life. Nurse, talking to the doctors about my conditions and assisting, saved my life. Doctors saved my life. The people cleaning the hospital floors and the hospital rooms, I started to see their impact. Like, oh, they're doing this so that when the paramedics come through, they have a clear, like, life started to make sense to me, and it all started to connect. And I asked myself a golden question in the hospital. Dan, you're 21 years old, you nearly lost your life from these stab wounds and things like that. If it was to be fatal, what impact did you leave? Like, where would I fit in that puzzle of life and impacting another person's life? And I hated the answer at that point. Just had all these mixtapes and broken teenage girls' hearts. Like, what did you do? And so I promised myself the moment I get out of the hospital, thank God I did, I'm going to dedicate my life to finding purpose. I don't know what that's going to mean or what that's going to be, but it's going to be a purpose-driven life. Fast forward, come out the hospital, stop drinking alcohol, stop smoking, just to better my body and my health. And that was around the time that David's Tea Company had started. And I got introduced to tea. Tea became this new habit obsession where I was just drinking tea, buying tea for people, spending way too much money on tea. And then I said, what if I took my life goal now of trying to be purpose driven, impacting people's lives in a positive way with my new love for tea, and created a tea company? And that was my introduction to business.
The the way in which a person discovers what is really valuable to them in life, I find oftentimes comes in the form of the hardest tragedies and lessons you have to learn.
Yeah. And it sucks that it doesn't have to be that, but it usually is that. But I think it's where tragedy brings us, just kind of evokes that deep reflection for you to question why. Why are you here? Why are you doing what you're doing? And I always tell when I speak, if I speak at a school, especially, like, guys, you don't got to get stabbed to find your purpose. God forbid. But if you can have that deep reflection moment, just ask why. And I always say, practice, ask why 5 times about anything. And then you'll peel back all the nonsense and find out the core. Just ask why. Okay, you say this, why? 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 And it causes you to go deep. Once you get deep enough, you're going to find a core fundamental thing, maybe a truth, and then you just live it.
When you think about speaking of schools, I've had the opportunity to work actually at a school with kids who are elementary to junior high age, and a lot of the kids get excited whenever I come around because, again, in elementary schools, there's usually not a lot of male teachers or employees for that matter. But
Right.
there's something that I think is so powerful about working with, or at least being exposed to, the mind of children and what they have to say and how they react, because it's easy for us to reflect back when we had motivational speakers at our schools, or those that came to tell us do this or do that, or career or whatever. And I feel like a lot of it was almost in one ear out the other, because it almost seems like
Yeah.
you're hearing the same thing over and over. But
Mm-hmm.
in saying that, asking somebody to peel back the layers, I think it sounds so simple, but it's like one of the hardest exercises that you can ever go through.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the reasons why it's so difficult is a lot of what happens in life doesn't force you or cause you to. You can be surface in anything. You know, get a job, work. You don't have to ask, why did I get this job? Or why am I working? Or why do I want to earn this much money? We often don't have to or feel that we have to. And so we don't. Why am I with these people? Why am I doing this podcast? I just don't tell people to, but I try to get people to ask that question and think about it. I had to because of where I was at. I had to ask, why music? Why? Because when I peeled it back, I realized all I was trying to do in music the whole time was to impact people through the vehicle of words or songs or music. So it was very easy for me to then say, oh, okay, well, I don't have to change that. I could just change the vehicle. What if I use tea as the tool? And that's why I built my business on that. So when we start asking why, we might find out some really cool things about ourselves and our pursuits and about what makes us happy and what makes the world a better place. You just got to ask why, right? And then you might even cut off some things or some people once you ask why. Sometimes we're even afraid of that. So, you know, it's an important exercise, and you're right, with children, you're so shapeable. And when I speak, I always think about me in the gymnasium listening to the motivational speaker who is speaking over us, all these words and lingos. So I always keep that in mind and say, okay, don't come and tell these kids anything. Come and share some stories and cause them to think.
1,000%. And it's so amazing that you mentioned that, because when I was a kid, I always used to ask why. My parents would joke, "Oh, you just ask why all the time." And I'm like, that's not exclusive to myself. Children are
Mm.
naturally curious. And sometimes I
Yep.
feel that that curiosity is almost beaten out of them
Yep.
figuratively by the time they get to high school, that they're just
100%.
coasting on autopilot. And whenever kids would ask me questions, I would explain to the very ends, to the very depths of why they're asking questions. And
Yep.
oftentimes the reaction they would get when I would share stories of places I've been or people I've met or things I've done, or when they ask me questions about things they want to do themselves, then it almost kind of leaves a smile on their face, because you can see that
Yep.
satisfaction of a kid understanding the core reason as to why this, why that, versus because I said so.
100%, 100%. And that ability to think and ask those questions is very important. Yesterday, my son, it's small, but actually, I shouldn't say it's small. He asked me, there's a restaurant, a breakfast restaurant called Sunset Grill. And he said, can we go to Sunset Grill, right? It's like 7 p.m. in the evening, right? He's like, can we go to Sunset Grill and get pancakes and stuff? I'm like, no, 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 they're not, they're a breakfast place, right? Obviously, they're not open right now. He's like, but then why is it called Sunset Grill, right? The sun sets in the evening. So why aren't they open? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I never thought about that. I'm here thinking, brushing it off, like, come on, it's a breakfast place, Sunset Grill, but it's called Sunset. The sun sets in the evening, and he's asking, why isn't it open? I don't know. And so kids have this amazing ability to pierce through all the assumes and assumptions and just ask, which is great. It's a superpower.
Yeah, like I never thought about that, because when Susan said Sunset, I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
classic breakfast place in Toronto. I'm like,
yeah,
oh wait,
exactly.
why is it called Sunset
Why
Grill?
is
It
it?
closes at 3
I don't
p.m.
know. Exactly. I don't know, but there you go.
When you got into the tea business, you mentioned being very obsessed, and it's just like a new hobby and a thing that you're really, really into. And what went through your minds that made you realize that you could use it as a vehicle to impact people? Because oftentimes when people think of starting businesses, or if you're entrepreneurial and you talk to people who maybe aren't as much, or maybe yet, you mention things that don't seem very techy or businessy, and they say, oh, I can never do anything with that, or I can never make a business out of that. So what was it about tea that made you realize you could actually use this as a vehicle?
Great question. It was the fact that I had so many fixed stereotypes about tea that I came to realize were so wrong. There was so much more room to innovate and to be the rebel in the industry of tea. So I always thought, like everybody, tea, oh, isn't that what you just drink when you're sick? Like chamomile, peppermint. But companies like David's Tea, not just David's Tea, but companies like David's Tea didn't present tea in that way. You walked into a David's Tea and there's like 45 tins with all these different colors and cool names, and every flavor and every type of tea did something different for your body, for your health, for your mind. Then I go to another tea shop and find out, well, there's things like terroir, which mean where a tea was, grown and cultivated. The tea from Chile is going to taste different than the tea from Kenya, and you get to experience culture and flavors. And I was like, whoa, okay, tea was not presented that way to me growing up. It was Big Ben, I'm sick, tea. So I'm like, as a music artist, I love to challenge the status quo. What if I take this healthy beverage that is so untapped and just be like the rebel, like do everything that the tea industry is not doing, make it cool, make songs about it with my rap hip hop songwriting thing. So I would make songs about it, put it up on YouTube, just make it cool. The packaging would be fun, brand names and all that stuff, and make it centered around impacting people's life in a positive way with our giving, with our messaging, and our experience. And the thought of that just became exciting to me. You could do it with burgers, fries. It just was tea for me because I stopped drinking alcohol and that became my new obsession. But it was the amount of runway that I saw in the industry that excited me with tea.
And the funniest thing about all that is that tea is not some new phenomenon. It's not like David's tea invented it. Like tea has been
No,
around for like centuries. Like
like thousands of years. But it's been presented in a particular way for that same period of time. And it only started to change when I was getting into the industry. Tea was always zen, focus, relax, heal. And it does have that. But it could be cool. It could be, you like to work out. There's teas for post-workout, pre-workout. You like steak. There's teas that pair with steak and offset the iron intake. Like there is so many things with tea. It just wasn't presented that way.
I find it so crazy how oftentimes it almost feels like people don't pull enough levers in their life to realize the things that
Right.
make them obsessed. Recently, I started to reread 4 Hour Work Week. I started reading it
Mhm.
like last year and didn't really get super far, but I started
Mhm.
rereading it, and something in one of the recent chapters, it just touched upon something that made me think of like your experience with tea, where Tim Ferriss talks about people often use the word happiness in the incorrect context because it's like, oh, the happiness, the opposite of it is not hatred, it's boredom. So really, it's
Right.
not a question of what's making you happy, it's what is making me excited.
Right.
And when you talk about
Exactly.
tea,
I
it's
read the
like
book a month and a half ago. So yeah.
it's like, oh, it's
100%.
not that tea makes you happy, not just it makes you happy, but it makes you excited. So like how can people, at least from your experience with tea, what are ways that you think people could discover what makes them excited?
Mhm. Great question. I always say, so in one of my presentations, I talk about this. I talk about it in a different context, but I think it applies the same way. I talk about it in terms of putting your personality out there to discover new things about yourself. But I think the same rule can apply to discovering things that excite you or new experiences. Start with internal. Have a conversation with yourself. What does make you happy to what you think happiness is? What makes you sad? Like, get to know you. What makes you nervous? Like, is it public speaking when asked to stand up and speak? Like, get to know those things about yourself, strengths, weaknesses, all that stuff. Then get out of yourself. Don't spend too much time inside because you're going to start to thwart your view about yourself and about things that make you feel a certain way. So get outside of yourself now. Talk to your trusted friends, trusted network, family, spouse. What do you think about me? When do you see me light up? When do you see me like I'm able to go 24 hours nonstop when I'm doing? Ask that question extrinsically. I don't know if that's a word, but now it is, right? And ask outside. And then after you do that, dive into some new experiences. My wife and I, a couple months ago, we booked a flight to Iceland. We've never been there. We always want to go there. And we went there and we played. We literally just played. We ran up and down roads, took pictures with horses, went behind the waterfalls, ate whale, puffin, just play, just do things, see how you feel. Does anything arouse in you? And then after that, I always say recapture. There is something that used to light you up as a child in the sandbox that you've probably lost, as you say, figuratively, it got beaten out of you. Life stripped it from you, experiences stripped it from you, your job stripped it from you, that bad partner stripped it from you. Get it back and incorporate it into what you're doing. Those tend to be, I think, kind of the model that will help a person find that thing. So it's a bit of talking, having conversations, testing, and recapturing.
I love the story about going to Iceland. The way and just the way you word it too, like just like you're like a little kid. It's like you're a little kid that's just playing. You're like in the playground. And I think it's
Yeah.
oftentimes it's one of the most underrated vehicles that gets us to that level of excitement is like, well, what made you excited as a kid? Okay, why? Have you tried that recently? Or have you done that? Or have you found
Right.
things that make you feel similar to that?
I love it.
Like
Testing and trying.
the now having been involved in business and getting into motivational speaking as well. First, I do want to know, when did you get to the point while working in business that you knew you wanted to also explore the avenues of being a motivational speaker alongside your tea company and alongside the ventures that you were trying to build?
Mhm. Everything for me in my business career was unconventional and not thought out. I was on this tea journey now, building out this tea journey with my wife, going to garage sales and setting up little, like lemonade stands, setting up tea stands, going to trade shows, putting myself out there at schools and things like that, and doing what they call guerrilla marketing. Just finding ways to be creative, stand out, and it was working. People were starting to buy our products. Our sales started to go up. People would say, you need to check out this. We're called the Willy Wonka of tea. Like they're so crazy, their flavors, their vibe. Check them out. Then people started to invite us. Daniel, can you come and talk at our business luncheon about your tea business? I'm like, oh yeah, for sure. Like any opportunity, and I'll serve tea too. Did that. Then they would tell me, come to this place. Can you come to this school? Right. And then I started talking, speaking. Then one day, a business organization reached out and said, Daniel, we'd love for you to come and share your business story about your tea company with our employees. What's your fee? And I'm like, fee? I'm like, there's a fee with this? Like, I had no idea. What do you mean a fee? I'm like, so then I quickly came up with something. I'm like, okay, average Canadian makes, let's call it $15 an hour. So what if I just like, I'm like $80 an hour? Cause I'm like, this is crazy. If you're gonna pay me $80 an hour to do what I'm doing for free. I'm like, okay, perfect. And when I got that check, I'm like, I just made $80 an hour. 80 became that. And then I realized, oh, this is a thing. And then I started to get, multinational companies and then travel, and it just kept growing. And I didn't plan to be a motivational speaker. I just shared my story.
Isn't that the power of storytelling?
That's it, right? People love stories and they never get tired of stories. I attach some actionable takeaways to whatever industry or audience. And then I don't want to say, voila, you're a speaker. But as you hone that craft, you're going to start to give value to the marketplace and what you talk about. And then, yes, you in some respect are a speaker.
The the theme of being able to impact people with words, I think, has carried a lot throughout this episode. And it's so crazy. I think about the quote from Steve Jobs. I think it's Steve Jobs who says, he's like, you can never connect the dots going forward. You can only
Yeah.
connect them looking back. And when
Mhm.
you think about how you wanted to, when you peel back the layers, you realize you wanted to be in music to impact people
Right.
with words. You got exactly that. It may not have been the vehicle that you were expecting when you were 10 or 11 or 12 on the playground, but
Yeah. Or
you've
the
got it.
way. I didn't know.
You've got it. And it's just, I think that's one of the things that's so amazing about the the neon sign behind you, because oftentimes I know in business there's a lot of controversy around like, well, do quit or don't quit, or quit the right thing, don't quit this. But I think the message of don't quit relates to, don't quit something that you feel is your purpose. The vehicle and the how
100%.
can change 1,000 times, but if
Mhm.
you feel called to that purpose, or if you feel called to finding a purpose and that changes to a different one, just don't quit on that.
Mhm. Don't quit, 100%. And in the same breath, don't quit, do it. Take action. So this reminds me every morning, okay, don't quit on what you're thinking, but also don't sit either. Take action, right? And so I love the double message there. And you're 100% right. Love it.
What would you say is the most valuable piece of advice that you would give somebody who is in their 20s? They are living and navigating what seems like an unconventional path that doesn't really have a clear way forward. If you were to sit in a room full of people who are in that age
Mhm.
demographic and unsure of how to navigate their unconventional life path going forward, what would be the most valuable piece of advice you'd give them?
I say this all the time. This message I don't think will ever change for me when sharing with others. I say it in a business way, but you could apply it to life, to anything. The secret to succeeding in business is in the first two letters of business. What are the first two letters of business? Be you. I think if you can just take that, own it in business, own it in your relationship, own it in your community, be you. If you were not being yourself, you wouldn't have said anything to me on the airplane where we met. If I wasn't being myself, I wouldn't have dressed up in costumes like Willy Wonka to sell my tea, which wouldn't have led to people taking notice of me. Like, it's authenticity. Let's just call it what it is. When you're yourself, then you succeed authentically, and that is the only true success.
True words have never been spoken. I love that so much. Like, what are the first two words or the first two letters in business? Be you. That's it's amazing, and it is, I think, one of the most underrated components of
Trust
the
me.
life experience is authenticity. Because
Mhm.
at least in my own experience, I can't speak for a lot of or every person, but one of the most differentiating factors with anything I'm ever buying, an experience or a physical item, do I feel that this is authentic to myself? Or do I feel like this is
Right.
if this is real to other, this is like a perceived image of myself to other people, or is this really authentic to me? And I think most people are searching for that. They want to find something that is authentic to themselves, but it takes experimentation and action to get there.
It does. And only when you sacrifice you to fit into something, you might make it by some measure. But then you get to that where you're like, oh, snap, I lost me to be here. I always say it's like a bird trying to fit into a cage, right? So it clips its wings just to get in. You're in, and there is some room in that cage. But now try to go over to the next thing. Can't, because it cost you too much to get to where you are now, right? And so don't clip your wings just to get inside the cage, right? Succeed as yourself. And that has done wonders for me. And I've always offered that advice, especially when you're in that age demographic that you pointed out. 100%. Keep honing you and find ways to be you in what you're doing and what you're offering to the world or to the marketplace.
Daniel, this has been one of the most fun talks I've ever had, and I've had a lot of fun conversations with people. And I'm super
Nice.
grateful for the time that you
Great.
spent being able to share many of your wise and amazing messages with me today. This has just been an absolute pleasure, and I'm extremely grateful for your presence on today's episode, man.
Thank you so much. It's like talking to family talking to you. So thank you for a great experience. I appreciate it.